Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm here with my good friend Mr. Matt Starr.
Hello.
So what we've got here is we've got 5 mics on a drum kit. You could actually go with 4. On the kick we have the LA320 tube mic, which is list price of $6.99. So it's not a cheap mic, but it's a good place to place a condenser. So if you have a large diaphragm condenser, this is a good place to put it. Our 2 overhead condensers are actually quite tasty. They're the Atlantis microphones, which we have set to neutral. Again, a pair of matched condensers would work on here. To be honest, I've also recorded overheads with mismatched condensers, but I would say whatever you have handy, use. Now the snare is interesting because it is a condenser microphone, but it is the LS208. It's a very focused condenser. It's front addressed, not side addressed, so you can see it's pointed down towards the snare. Last but no means least, the cheapest microphone, which actually comes as a pair for about $400, is an LA120. We wanted to talk about something important, and that is if you want a great drum sound, get a great drummer. I'm being really, really blunt. These are really nice microphones, and we're recording them completely flat with no EQ or no compression, and you will download the multi-tracks and hear for yourself. But you're going to hear that the biggest difference is the way that Matt plays, because if he plays his toms timidly and then smashes the cymbals, we have no tom mics, so the bounce will be off all over the place. So no matter what expense of overhead microphones you're using, the biggest difference is going to be the drummer. I will record all 5 of these microphones, but we'll mute the snare and the hi-hat and get him to play thinking about the fact that we're only using 3. Because if you've only got 3 inputs, or less sometimes, you could go with overhead and kick. The point is, a drummer who plays balanced will give you a really, really great drum sound. Matt, when you're recording drums on your own, how many mics are you using? You're usually using, you've got tom mics as well, presumably.
Yeah, toms, snare top and bottom, 2 on the kick, 1 inside,
Right.
one outside, maybe a third, like a 57 on the batter side, because I have a bigger bass drum, and so that gives it a little of a less aggressive attack, kind of a 2K-ish thing rather than like a 5K-ish kind of thing.
But even in those situations, playing balanced is the biggest part of the kit.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's everything. Yeah.
And in this instance, it's even worse because you don't have tom mics.
Right, which is fine because that's how I always played. Was I wanted the toms to be as loud as the snare.
Right.
So I never changed. And I started out on a 4-track with a copy of a 58. You know, it's a very simple basic, and I just put it in the room and expected it to sound like Motley Crue or something. And I realized, oh, I'm hitting the cymbals too hard, not hitting the toms hard enough. The bass drum isn't loud, so I'd move it around a little bit, but ultimately it was just on me. So I learned from a very early age how to balance everything.
Right.
So that's just been a really good skill to have.
So we've got level, as I said, no compression, no EQ, and you will be able to download all these multi-tracks and hear for yourself. So let's just get him to play a groove. So I'm going to record. So yeah, have some fun, play a groove, give us lots of tom fills so we can hear how those overheads, you know, interact between the cymbals and the toms. So let's listen to this little section that he just played. I thought it was a really great thing to highlight. Now that section there is great because you can hear all of the toms in the overheads. So if I just listen to the overheads in solo, great illustration. That last cymbal he hits just plays it beautifully and evenly. The snare is definitely the loudest thing in there, but it's pretty darn even. So if I grab just a generic compressor, which for me is always like the R comp, whatever you have, it comes free of your DAW will do the job. So I'll just put on like a 3-to-1 ratio. Let's get the snare and just capture it. I mean, that's great. Put the whole kit together. I mean, that's beautifully balanced. And yeah, there's some really nice overheads there. But ultimately, it is the way that Matt plays. And I could get in there and sculpt it a bit and gain up some of those toms if I wanted to and get really finesse it. But the reality is it's all about the drummer. So let's get some kick and snare samples and some tom samples on that. Can you give us some kick samples? Great. Snare top, please. Snare, please. Cool, and then a couple of racks and a couple of floors. Probably turn the snare bottom off. Great. So there, we just got some basic samples. So you better download those and use them for yourself. You can either blend them together or just separate them out. It's pretty miraculous, you know, just listen to those overheads, how the rack and floor sound. And the floor. Add a little bit of lows onto that and you'll get something really tasty in the toms. Just the snare top alone, it's great. Like nice and controlled. You could throw in the overheads with it. You get a little extra kind of air and ambience. Really fantastic. So that's having a hi-hat mic. If you just wanted, and you only had 4 mics, have a listen to the drums now. Here's with the hi-hat. Now let's mute it. Solo overheads. Now let's try one other thing. Let's listen to just a kick and the overhead. So this was if you were only using 3 mics. There's no snare top mic, no hi-hat. So there you go. I mean, that really is the proof. I've got some compression on that just to duck the snare into the overheads, help bring out the toms and stuff like that. But that's it. Compression on the overheads, kick mic only, and it's a good drum sound, a really good drum sound, because it's a good drummer playing really evenly. People ask me all the time, what makes a great drum sound? Well, here we have some really nice microphones. Not the most expensive, but definitely not cheap microphones, but great quality louder mics with no compression and no EQ, but with a good drummer. The drummer is the most important part. Now, obviously, when you individually mic stuff with drummers that are very uneven, you can get in there and correct stuff and compress it. But really, a great drum sound comes from a great drummer. We just played back all 5 mics, then I muted the hat, played back 4, and the hat was still beautifully coming through on the overheads. And then, of course, I muted the snare. And we ended up with a great drum sound because you're playing balanced. Now, the question is, when you turn up to sessions and they want this kind of Glyn Johns idea of just the 3 mics and stuff like that, are you thinking differently for that? Or do you think your balance is like that anyway?
It's pretty much like that, but I will definitely be a little more gentle on the cymbals.
Right.
And especially a scenario like this where the toms, there's no choice. If it's not in their right volume, then they're gonna have problems. So then I will really lay into the toms a little more. But with the cymbals, it's a matter of hitting them hard enough that the cymbal opens up. Because I've had sessions where I just kind of tap it and I listen, I go, it sounds like I didn't hit the cymbal correctly, right? You hit it kind of medium soft, it's like the Ringo, you get the boosh. You hit it a little harder, you get the splash. But then if you don't hit it hard enough, it just sounds like a gong. You know, so just that touch, and you know, when I'm doing those fills, I'm like, ga goom goom ga 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 goom ba da doom. So it's all these little gear shifts that go on.
Right. Any specific techniques other than just being aware?
Doing it over and over again helps, and really listening. You know, just even listening to that playback, I could hear that this floor tom was a little louder, and I thought, okay, I think I was hitting the tom, but I realized, oh well, this is a fair amount further away. So if I did another take, I would go, okay, I'm going to actually hit that rack a little harder to compensate. So I think just using your ears and really listening to what's going on, you know.
Right, right. And if you're tracking with a full band, then you're listening and you're going, wow, I've got to hit this harder to even cut through the rest of the band.
Yeah, for the drummer, if you're playing with somebody else in the room or a whole band, the headphone mix is really important. So if you're comfortable, just take the time to go, can you turn down? If you have your own cue, that's great. But like, you know, can you give me less guitar? And if you got a click in there too, and you want to hear the click and the singer and the thing, really take the time to get your mix right, because you don't want to be fighting just to get over the volume in your ears, which I've done. And in the end of the night, your ears are fried and you realize, that was way too loud. I didn't have to have that up so loud. You know? Yeah,
I've definitely been there. I know drummers that wear earplugs and then headphones over the top.
I do that too. Yeah.
So you're never really, especially with clicks, you're never really killing your ears.
Right, because if I'm playing my usual kit, which is, you know, 28, 15, 18, they're bigger than this. So just the acoustic volume of the drums is really loud. So I need to get away from that. So I will put in 2 earplugs if I'm just playing to a track, and then I'll put the headphones on so I can get the click, and everything is louder than these drums.
Right, excellent. So you asked some questions of your audience about what they wanted to know about drum recording. What were those?
They wanted to know, what's the ultimate snare drum mic? No. They wanted to know, one thing that I got a lot was, how do you deal with the bleed from the cymbals into the drum mics and, you know, hi-hat into snare? Right. So that's, you know, a question for you.
I've seen all kinds of stuff, and I've even tried using those kind of shields that go around like a 57 for the snare. It can make a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
In the UK, when I lived there, we used to do a lot of 4 mics on the drums, and we had no hi-hat mic. And that was pretty normal. And even when I started, you know, getting into bigger studios and making records where I had tom mics, the hi-hat was still the last thing we worried about.
Right.
Because the hi-hat was always bleeding into the snare and into the overheads.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And once you EQ'd the snare the way you wanted it to, and you got it to, you know, you started brightening up with some 7K and above, all of that hi-hat bleed was kind of in there. And nobody really cared. I think by the time sort of, you know, we got into the DAW world, we realized that we could get really precision in there and start reducing it. But then it's like, what drum sound are you after? Do you want it to sound like an instrument, or do you want it to sound like separate pieces?
Right.
And it's really tough, because in a lot of modern metal, it's like kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, tom, 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 cymbal. And I know my guys, friends of mine that record metal, will individually spot mic cymbals, and they will only bring up the cymbals when the cymbals are being hit. So they don't have an accurate stereo version of a kit like we do here. So it's all horses for courses. What genre are you doing? If you're doing metal, then you're probably going to want to get in there, or maybe even some EDM, get in there and really go crazy on separation. So that little shield that you can buy that goes around the snare wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing for metal or for EDM if you wanted just like a really separate stuff. The other thing is, quite frankly, a lot of those records, you know, going back to XTC, they would, and of course the Foo Fighters did it, and plenty of other people, Dave Grohl would play the whole drum kit without any cymbals, and then overdub them.
Yeah.
You could do that too. We did it the other day because we were testing out ID24, which is the smaller version of what we're using at the moment, and that was only 2 inputs. So we had this girl, Bianca, play a beat and then overdub the cymbals, and then perfect separation. So I think it's genre dependent.
Yeah.
Like I don't care about the bleed if it's like classic rock, something that's more organic sounding. It doesn't bother me too much because I think going back to our whole point is if you're an even drummer, that bleed is subtle and it's not a big deal.
Right.
I think the person asking the question is probably going to have to work with their drummer a little bit. Now, if you can't work with the drummer and they're too young or it's just going to confuse them and they're still figuring it out, get kitchen towel, tape it to the bottom of the cymbals. Start doing things. You can get away with drummers without them knowing. I've done it a few times. Just get rid of some of it. Is there some on the bottom of this at the moment? Yeah, there's a little piece under there. Look.
And I didn't even notice
He didn't even know it was there.
And I'm supposed to be a professional.
Just put a little bit to get rid of the bite. There's not on this one, but just a little bit. I mean, that's the Paiste 2002. That's the best ride cymbal ever made in the history of ride cymbals. That is the John Bonham ride cymbal. It doesn't get any better. When I hear that in a track, I'm like, my hair's down on end. I'm like, that's the sound of what. That's the way ride cymbals are supposed to sound. I can have different hi-hats, new beats, and zildjians, and fine with all of that. But that to me is the sound of a ride, you know, because you just think Bonham.
And you've heard it. You know, you've heard it on Van Halen records. You've heard it on Led Zeppelin records. Yeah.
Yeah. If you only have one Paiste cymbal, that's the Paiste cymbal you get.
Get it.
I think I have both sizes, don't I? That was a 22. I have a 20 as well somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's been on there forever, and it just tames it to just the right way. But you can do that on hats as well. You don't want to do that. You want the drummer to be playing balanced, but you also don't want to take an inexperienced drummer and make them so hesitant that they don't play very well.
Right. It's really about the spirit of the recording and what's going to have the most energy and sound the best. And where's that line?
Yeah. So if you can solve it with some isolation around the snare, a little bit of dampening on the cymbals so they're not quite so crazy bright, whatever it might be, maybe even just tightening it one extra little thing can just kill a little bit of that. Just experiment, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is about the drummer playing balanced. But if it's a young or an inexperienced drummer and you just come in there and tell them they're not playing evenly and suddenly they're all terrified, that's worse.
Right, yeah. I mean, if you've got a punk rock band in there and they're just flailing.
Yeah.
You know what? Let it be that. Yeah, let it be that. I mean, a few things that I've been asked to do or I've tried, and they, you know, marginally help, is to raise up the hi-hat so you get it away from the snare, raise up the cymbals so you get them away from the drum. So the distance will provide you a little bit of coverage, but yeah, it's a really common thing, you know.
When I have a drummer that the snare is here and the hi-hat's there, I'm thinking, he's either got a lot of muscles and was quite terrifying in the studio and the engineer feels very, very intimidated, or he's probably never really recorded much, because if that hi-hat is right next to the snare, you know, first of all, how are you going to get the mic in? And secondly, the bleed is going to be unbelievable. But yeah, when you get like Vinnie Colaiuta, it's like this. It's like, here's a snare. All these cymbals are up like this.
Right, and that's not a rock, he's not a hard rock drummer, you know what I mean? But
he's just been beaten up by every producer and engineer in the planet.
Yeah.
All those guys just, everything's out of the way, perfect separation, you know.
Yeah, and I think that answer goes to something else too. Like, you know, you want the drums to be in tune. You want quality drums. Although I've done sessions on drums that I look at them and go, that is a POS. And then I hit them and I listen through the mics and I go, sounds great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, that's another thing too, is don't be a gear snob and don't think that the drums being in tune, great. How the guy hits them, huge. But if there's like a little overtone or something, because this tom was ringing longer than this one. And this one kind of goes, bow, and I can hear the bottom hit. And I listen to playback and go, it's fine. You know, so a lot of times as an engineer, you might think you want to get something to sound pristine, but then you put it in the mix and then it's sterile. So like, if you got some bleed, okay. You know, again, unless it becomes a problem.
I know drummers that hate those perfect toms. Yeah. Work with a few drummers, without throwing them under the bus, that hate, they hate that. They just want to hear do, do, do. They don't want to hear like this perfectly tuned, you know, like, oh yeah. Because it starts to sound, dare I say it, too sophisticated, too ponytail, too sutapu, you know. The hat's like super crisp and high-endy. For me, the best hi-hat sound is like mid-range and just, you know, angry. And don't get me wrong, there are certain genres I'm sure all of those things work for. But I don't know. I mean, I do like toms that are tuned to the key of the song. Think classic free. You know, da do do, you know, and it's perfectly in tune. But that was one guitar, bass, and drums. you go back to Fire and Water, you know, it's Kossoff, a bass player, Andy Fraser, and Kirk on drums, you know, with Paul Rogers singing, and it's just unbelievable. And so that is almost, it's an instrument, but it's a tuned instrument that fits in the song.
Right.
I think that stuff is like really super important to remember. It's like, what are you playing? What's the genre? Like if we were doing a death metal track, there's no way we would use 3 mics on the drum kit.
Right, and this would
I'd have to
be
get
way
that kit
too
to
much
sit.
ring. We would,
Yeah.
you know, batten. I mean, this bass drum's so gorgeous. We would just batten that down so it's, you know, very clear and clicky. Yeah, I mean, it's genre dependent for
Yeah,
sure.
we would definitely be close miking top and bottom on the snare. You know, we would want that to be as separated as possible because it's got to cut through a wall of massive guitars. But in a classic rock song, yeah, we could put down a Zeppelin guitar part and a bass line and have somebody wail over it, and this is a great drum sound. I mean, Glyn Johns did it on most of the, you know, I don't know how many, first 4 or 5 records, you know, with Andy as well. They were using minimal amounts of mics,
Right.
but Bonham was filling up the room
Mm-hmm.
and playing super evenly. And yes, when he played toms, it was like, it wasn't,
Right.
it's like everything was defined.
Yeah, the articulation is really important, you know, and I think what I tell a lot of session drummers is, look, if you're showing up, like what I might like if I was in charge of the whole session is one thing, but when I go to work for somebody, I just show up and say, okay, right? So at the same time, as for an engineer, I think that's a good message too. Like, okay, if you have a punk rock band and you're trying to get this kind of Steely Dan drum sound, that's maybe not going to work. Like, what's the band want? Because they're your client, you know. And on the flip side too, if you're doing a Steely Dan record, yeah, it should sound like that.
Lenise told me, I don't know if you knew this, on Asia, Bernard Purdy, it's 4 mics on the drum kit. And everybody would assume that Steely Dan, Asia, like 27 mics, everything individually EQ and compressed. And I said, how did you position the overheads? And she said, we didn't. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, we let Bernard Purdy do it. Because he would play and he would move them until he got it even with the cymbals and the toms the way he wanted it to be.
Wow.
So let him.
So give him an engineer. Is he getting an engineering credit on that record too?
I don't know, but you know, it's smart because if you're a great drummer and you're playing balanced and you just kind of like, oh, I just need to drop that down like an inch or 2 and, oh yeah, no, it's right for the way I play, you know.
Right, that's amazing.
Yeah, I was like, wow.
I think another thing to talk about is composition. That kind of leads into that, which is like sometimes a part, you know, is just too busy and it just doesn't work, or it's not exciting enough, right? And so like composition is really huge. If you're doing something with vocals, obviously, play to the vocal, support the vocal. If there's not vocal, there's probably some more leeway there. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, there's probably a lot of producers that end up playing drums on tracks because they bring an artist in and they play a little drums, they play a little guitar, they kind of fill in. I know there's a lot of guys like that. So I think those guys end up doing better sometimes than actual drummers who come in because they want to play the drums, you know, where the producer is thinking about the song. Yeah. So I think composition is I know it's a huge piece, and just really not doing something if there's nothing to be done, you know, and then when there's something to do it. And if you're playing rock and roll, do it big. You know, so you have a moment, but really let the song just play itself. You'd kind of be amazed at how little you can play.
Makes sense because, you know, one of my favorite artists, depending on the day, sometimes my favorite artist is Stevie Wonder. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he played drums on so many of his songs. Right. And you solo his drums and you're like, what the heck is going on? You put it in the track, it makes absolutely perfect sense. Right. He's playing for the song.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think too, like, you know, when you see on, you know, American Idol or whatever, there's certain songs that get sung again and again and again, because those songs, like John Bonham's drum parts, make the musician look good. So if I play Whole Lotta Love, you can be like, wow, you're great. I'm like, well, I'm just playing his part. It's not really, you know, but it's so well composed that it makes a drummer look good. Yeah. Right. And so I think that is a huge piece of it. And as far as getting all the sonics together, it's like if the part works and then it works within the context of the music, you can speak to this, it's much easier to mix. Sure. Right? Because it's just everything sits where it should be, you know? Yeah.
Well, I like with toms, I just want bold statements. I can't stand a somebody's like it's like, why did you do that? It just doesn't translate. And that super fast kind of roll, just the cymbals bleeding into it, no matter if the cymbals are up here, it's just, To me, it's the Pat Boones and the Debbie Boones, and even if they're fast, that I don't care how fast that's played, as long as it's played with intention, it's going to cut through in a mix.
Right.
Yeah, if it's just a little tickle of a little fast roll, you spend hours bringing it up. And when you finally bring it up, there's no attack. So all you get is boom, 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 boom. You get this low end that just rumbles and just blends into the bass guitar on the low end of the instruments. I want to hear the attack of the stick hitting it. And it doesn't. I'm not saying everything just has to be dak, 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 but has to have a nice. You can play by dynamics and have a rat, tat, 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 but I need to hear the stick hitting it and then the body coming afterwards, not just the body,
Yeah, and I think music is a conversation, and if you're talking over somebody, that's just plain old rude, along with not being good music, to listen to. But also, like, wait for your moment, and if there's a little hole, all right. What I always tell drummers, I go, if everyone starts together and you're in the studio, someone goes, here's our song, we all start together, cool. I'm going to do a fill at the top of the song. If no one says anything, hey, it starts with the drums, right? Because we're all coming in anyway, right? And there's a big blank space, and I can send it in with some good energy. So I mean, if guys, you just find your moments when to speak, but then when you say something, a la Roger Taylor, say it boldly,
Oh yeah. Talking to David Frangioli this morning, and we were talking about Roger Taylor. Why is he not talked about as being one of the greatest rock drummers of all time?
Oh, yeah.
It's a weird one. I mean, it's late. That fill coming back out to that whole tempo change.
Right.
It's genius. I want to go and listen to it after this. Or Fat Bottom Girls, that drum fill. Oh man, I mean, bold and just so yes. And a great feeling drummer. If you get some of the solo tracks and just listen to his groove, it's consistent.
It's beautiful. And he's similar to Alex Van Halen in that his hi-hat is so reactive and emotional. Yeah. Where someone like Bonham is more of a and Ringo too is pretty kind of straight with it. Rogers is constantly moving and reacting, and he'd open it on the snare hits. They're so emotive. Yeah. It's really, and then he comes in with, which is actually kind of a feminine, emotional, and then these toms are so masculine and they're giant fills, so that dynamic, and it worked great in Queen's music because it was so theatrical, but yeah, he's one of the greats for sure.
Yeah, I think he should be, when we're talking about top 5 rock drummers, I think he should be in there.
We had some people asking about, should you get one take or do you do edits, or is it okay to punch? We used to call it punching in, but comping.
All of the above, really.
Yeah.
I just like a vocal or any great part, if it's done in one take and it's amazing, wonderful. I think the best answer to that question is, how are you recording? In a situation like this, where it's 3 or 4 or even only 5 mics, because you've got a limited amount of inputs on your DAW or on your interface going to DAW, that's a different process. I'd probably be doing multiple takes and then maybe comping some moments together. But if it's you and a bass player in a room, I'm going to go with the combination of how the drums and bass feel together.
Right.
And that usually gives me a completely different idea, because I might have whole sections where you're pushing and pulling a little bit, but it doesn't matter because you're in a band and your bass player's actually pushing and pulling with you. And I'm going to let a lot more go, and I'm going to go for the combined feel of the rhythm section. But what tends to happen is when we've got something in isolation, especially if you're just playing to a click or in a scratch guitar or something like that, or a finished track, which is 99% of what drummers do now. You probably get sent here's the song with no drums,
right,
and a click track, please play along.
Yeah,
you're going to be going in trying to lock to it, because you're now the last person to go on the song. So you're locking to it. You might go back and say, I want to punch in this section. I want to try this here. Oh, I like take 3 all the way up to the second chorus. I'll use that. I mean, it's a different kind of process. But if it's rhythm section in a room, it's the combined feeling. And I'd much rather get the feel of the bass and drums pushing and pulling together over anything being gridded and perfect. Because all the songs we love are when the rhythm section are just killing it.
Right.
Just it's magic, going in. We were talking about The Who earlier, every fill that Keith Moon ever did seemed to push or pull so dramatically, there's no way it could have been played to a click.
Right.
He could rush into something and jump into a chorus, or do the opposite and leave a gap, and it's late, and it makes it more dramatic.
Right.
And if you've got a guitar player and a bass player that are with you, that wins every time.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And I've, I think we all suffer from it because we want it to be great. So I've had so many sessions where I've done, like when we're doing the Mr. Big record a few years back, we do one take. Oh, it sounded great. Give me one more, guys. Do one more. And I go and listen. That feels okay. I think I got one more. Okay, and I go do one more, and I do the fill perfectly. And I say, that felt pretty good. And then we listen, and the producer will be like, one before, I'm like, because the second one was just had the energy. The third one, yes, I hit the fill and I crushed the fill, but just the magic went away.
Yeah.
And I may even been more technically right with that click, but you kind of gotta. The more you do it, I think you learn how to recognize that thing, because I think the fact that we can see the music, we can see the waveform, we can see the click. It's very easy to go, oh. So I had a session I did, and the guy goes, oh yeah, you slowed down a little bit right here. I'm like, yes, going into the pre-chorus, and then I caught up on that enabled me to play the fill faster and then land on the one for the chorus. So I actually just pulled it back so we could say, but he didn't even listen, he was just looking, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's like coloring, and I think if we really learn to use our ears and our hearts to feel that emotion and let that override. And you got to find the middle ground. And if it's super aggressive, metal, that's going to be more precision. And then if it's White Stripes, it's going to be more loose. So the music will determine that. But I think finding that balance between the two and learning how to recognize not perfection but magic.
Right.
Because I've had artists that I've worked with, and they say, I want this to be perfect. And I go, let's not bring that word in here. Awesome, epic, mind-blowing, incredible, cool, but perfect, that's a dangerous word,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to agree with you on there is I was talking to Pat Mastalotto, and he told me, well, came from two different directions, because David Bottrell told me that Thrack by Crimson was the first take. And if anybody knows that song, it's like 7 minutes long, and it's got multiple tempo changes and tons of different time signatures and all this kind of stuff. So it's like mind-blowing. However, learning about the way that Crimson works is Robert Fripp is a live guy. He's all about live. So they go in and they rehearse and they write and come up with an idea of a song. Then they go out and play it. And they play it till like they know it standing on their head.
Yeah.
And yes, it has sections where one guy's playing in 7, other guy's playing in 5. It's that kind of insanity. So David had not even heard the song, and he goes into record, and it's on tape, goes into record. They all play, and they come in and they listen, the first take, and they go, yeah, it's pretty good. I like that. And then Bruford says to him, yeah, so bar 127, if you can punch in between this beat here and then that, and Dave Bottrell's like, that's the first time I've ever heard the song. I don't know where bar, I'm just trying to figure out the time signature, because first time I'd ever heard it. Right. And it's like you tell the story of like the first take, but they've been playing it live, they rehearsed it, wrote it, played it live, and by the time they come into the studio, it's not necessarily going to get better by playing it 15 times in a row.
No, I agree.
They're sort of in that zone. So there's always these things to kind of think about. And to your point was saying about not perfect, other thing David told me was that when he did the Fripp Sylvian record, the Sylvian Fripp record, he had not worked with both of them together, and he was assuming that Fripp was going to be the perfectionist and Sylvian was going to be the rock guy. Exact opposite. Fripp would just be like, I like that when it was a little calamitous, when it was a little wrong. I love that. And Sylvian was obsessed about everything being super, super perfect. But if anybody says the words, the name Robert Fripp, you immediately think perfection.
Right.
But not. It was all about performances. So even in strict, incredibly complex music, those bands, the best of it, with the Brufords and Pat and Gavin Harrison plays with them now, all these incredible drummers, it's still got to breathe. It's still got to sound like human beings played it.
Right.
Put it on a grid, it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Not for that music, for sure. And I think too, another thing for guys to keep in mind is just to give themselves a break. Like, yeah, if I nail it on the first take and it's front to back and there's no edits, Okay, that feels great. But you know what? At the end of the day, when the record's done and we listen back and go, hey, this is a great record, it really doesn't matter what we had to do.
Exactly.
And something I used to say to my bandmates, I go, something, take 42. Because I had a bootleg of the Beatles, and one of the tracks on there was something, take 42. I go, 42.
Yeah.
Like, now maybe one was like 2, I drop a stick. Okay, take 2, you know, but 41 attempts.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, you know, it just takes what it takes.
And they splice takes.
Yeah, you know what I
Spliced
mean?
a lot of takes. They'd be like, oh, we like this section, put in this section, take it from here, whatever. Whatever they had to do to make it be amazing.
Yeah, so I think for guys coming up that maybe haven't been in a bigger studio, in a bigger situation, and they think that everyone plays it perfect, it's like, no. Sometimes some guys do, and some guys don't, but just whatever you got to do to get it to sound great in the end, that's it, you know?
Right. Good way to end.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Please download the multi-tracks. You know what? I'm going to get Matt to play it on the way out. We're going to record a bit of that. We'll play for a couple of minutes, so you'll get some more things to listen to. You've got those kick, snare, and tom samples that you can use as well. Don't forget, a great drum track starts with a great drummer. Let's go and record. Let them have some fun, and we'll get a few minutes of it.